Well, hello everyone. Welcome to week 4 of this International Economics seminar. Uh, we continue with the discussion that we started last week about international trade. We'll start now with the concept of economic integration, like the NAFTA in the US or the European Union. Economic integration is the commercial policy of allowing trade with some specific patterns. And what is the rationale? Well, the rationale is the following. Imagine that the U.S. is importing some products from Japan, and so if you see here, you see that without the NAFTA, so without this preferential agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, Japan has a better situation than Mexico. So consequently, the U.S. will import their products straight from Japan. Now let's say that Mexico enters into the NAFTA. So consequently, the prices from Mexico will be better. So consequently, you will see that Japan will start being an exporter of this product to the U.S. So you see that there is a situation in which you have the concept of trade creation and trade diversion. Trade creation because now the U.S. will import a larger amount compared to from Mexico, compared to what the imports from Japan were before the NAFTA, if you want. So that is trade creation. So there is more trade than before. But there is also trade diversion because now instead of importing from Japan, it's importing from Mexico. And there is also a trade deflection. In other words, countries that export to Mexico and then from Mexico to go to the US. So the final destination is the US. So you see there is a whole bunch of impacts on this trade. Uh, what are the benefits of these unions? Well, number one is increased competition. So you eliminate domestic monopolies, which is beneficial for the community. Number two, economies of scales, because now a country can export much more, like Mexico, for example, so it has economies of scales. And finally, stimulus to investment. So now a lot of companies invest in Mexico to develop products that finally will be exported to the US. Uh, I will not get into detail about the European Union, just show you two slides. Remember that these videos that I'm recording are oriented only to the mathematical or mathematical part. I let you read on your own all the more conceptual part, because otherwise it would be these videos will be too long, and probably you know the subjects doesn't make any sense that I make them so long. So you see that the European Union considers a whole set of institutions that are involved, and a whole set of steps until you get to the economic unification. You have something similar with NAFTA. I let up to you to read what is the implications of NAFTA. And you have other examples of economic integration, which many of them are not doing very well, because what happens is because of all the instability among countries that we will discuss in the next part of the discussion, it's very difficult to keep this economic integration alive, because when you have fluctuation of prices between countries, between 10, 20, 30% of changes in the prices of one or the other, these agreements become unfeasible. So, okay, let's go to the second part, that is about growth and development. And basically, what we'll discuss here, what are the different ways and why countries get engaged into these trade agreements, or how this international trade impacts on the growth of one specific country. So conceptually, you remember that the idea is that you move the production possibilities frontier eh, based on improvements on the technologies or trade agreements or whatever. So consequently, you generate an expansion of the economy. This is the rationale, and it has like two dimensions. One is considered a static dimension, that is, international trade allows each trading part to consume beyond its domestic ability to produce. And this is very much what I told you many times in the previous weeks. Is like, when you become specialized, like you become a dentist and another becomes an engineer and another becomes, okay, there is a whole bunch of benefits based on your specialization. You make more money as being a good dentist, and consequently you can buy more products from a good engineer. So this is kind of the benefit. But there is also a dynamic dimension. This dynamic dimension is mostly connected to how with a trade you create like remember the concept of intellectual capital, knowledge, and relationships. Okay, with this trade you develop intellectual capital. So you develop economies of scales, you develop new knowledge, you develop new relationships, you develop new possibilities. So there is a dynamic dimension that benefits all partners in these situations. Another dimension is, once you get involved in this set of benefits, is that you generate even more benefits. I mean, you start having a flow of financial capital that goes from one country to another and helps to develop new possibilities. You generate demands for new products that in the past didn't exist. You eliminate a monopoly power, so now you have like more international competition, with diminishes some domestic monopolies, if you want. So let's go to another concept that is related to this how international trade impacts on growth. That is the concept of terms of trade. Terms of trade conceptually is the ratio of the price of the country's exports to the price of its inputs, and it has like two dimensions. Dimension number one is this concept of in the book use the N, and N is basically precisely that, the relationship between the prices of exports versus the prices of inputs. And what happens is that, for example, a country like that engage with trade, like Mexico versus the U.S., is that the commodities we are talking about countries that uh, have like a negative image of trade. Typically, developing countries have the feeling that they are selling commodities, they are exporting commodities that have a low value added, a low price, and are importing high value added products that are substantially more expensive. So Mexico exports corns and imports computers, just to say. This is not a real example because Mexico exports many things. But Colombia, for example, most of what they export are commodities like coffee or oil or these kind of products, or flowers or fruits, or the same with Chile, and imports high value added products. So consequently, it seems that the terms of trade, the relationship among the prices, are negative for Colombia or Chile or these kind of countries, in the sense that the export prices are commodity go down and import prices high value added go up. So the terms of trade systematically deteriorate in those emerging or developing nations. But there is a second variable, it's called I, the income aspect of terms of trade. That is that even though this relationship between the prices of exports versus the prices of imports maybe a weak, so maybe the price of exports grow 10% while the prices of imports, high value added imports, grow 50%. So this is not good if the relationship. But there is another dimension, that is the volume of exports. So so probably the terms of trade are negative for Mexico or for Colombia or for Chile, but they are exporting substantially more. So in income terms, international trade is beneficial, even though the terms of trade as such, I mean the relationship between prices, are negative. So this is there is a lot of studies and that confirm that it is true that the relationship between the prices of exports and imports in developing nations have been negative, but there is also studies that show that the income has been extremely positive for these countries. So this is a very interesting, if you want, a concept to consider, because there is a lot of political discussions. If you want to, if you go to developing countries, there is a tremendous reaction against free trade. So because they consider the prices are negative. They don't consider what happens with the whole story. That is, the total income from exports go up. However, there is this concept of immiserizing growth, that is, a country grows, however, people are not better off. So, because this concept of terms of trade, so the big parts of the economy that are exporting those commodities with a low price, they don't get better because of trade. So this is kind of the similar to what we saw before. And this is kind of the rationale, and it's interesting to see the rationale, to see whether this is true or not. So in the initial situation, you have a country that the domestic price is substantially lower than the national price. So this is beneficial because this country benefits trading, if you want. So because of trade, if initially this was the supply curve, now with trade, the red line will be the new supply curve. So consequently, it has a big, if you want, ceiling, a big gap of between the domestic and the international price, which is beneficial for that country. However, there is a second aspect, is that if the export of that country, the international exports, are large enough, they may produce a reduction in the international price. So consequently, if you see the entire picture, trade produces a benefit, that is all this gray area, the welfare gain from growth, but it produces a loss, if you want, in the sense that because of the larger volumes of sales that this country is exporting, is producing this red zone is welfare loss from the fall in the terms of trade, because of this export, the terms of trade, that is relationship between the exports and imports, deteriorate. So consequently, trade can be negative. The studies show that in general, the welfare gain is larger than the welfare loss, if you want. Okay, another aspect to consider in international trade, the export instability. There are many reasons why prices, why the volumes of sales and the prices move up and down. What the developing countries can do about it is to generate like sort of agreements, if you want, like the case of the OPEC, that is a coordination among nations to establish, to limit the volumes of sales in order to try to produce a gain in the price. So this is another important aspect. Okay, the last concept to consider is a very important discussion in the world, that is the import substitution policy versus export promotion policy. Typically, many countries like India, Russia, European countries, US, Latin American countries, have followed the import substitution policy, that is to restrict imports in order to protect the local production, develop the import, and then internally develop the product internally, and eventually one day the country will be in a good situation to start exporting the industry that they protected. And another policy is what most of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and now China, that is the export promotion. That is, instead of protecting from imports, the domestic product from domestic market from imports, they promote the if you want the fostering exports, and so you have these two policies: import substitution and export-oriented industrialization. The import substitution has been severely criticized because it has several drawbacks, if you want. One is that the industries that are protected normally continue being efficient forever. So so in the long run, protecting one industry from international inputs, if you want, tends to become a negative for the nation because they continue having an obsolete product that cannot be sold. The domestic economy may be too small, so there is no economies of scales, and with no economies of scales, you will never be efficient. So you have to export in order to get those economies of scales. And import substitution is difficult for more complex products because there is no local production. So consequently, there is protect against what if you cannot produce this product internally. So like microchips, most of the countries don't have technology to that. Export orientation is practically the negative of everything that I showed in the previous slides. So export promotion promotes economies of scale, promotes domestic efficiency, and industrial expansion is not limited by the scale of the domestic economy, because you have to consider the international economy. So if the domestic economy is small, like Korea, for example, Korea has had a tremendously small economy. And so now, because of exports, the level of exports are 4 times the level of their domestic economy. So you see that the discussion is very interesting. Okay, so this is it, and if you have any doubt, please let me know. Hope you enjoy the week. Bye bye.